There have always been many ways of traveling, exploring, and overcoming obstacles. For centuries, people have tried finding ways of traveling around the sides of mountains when they come to them. Until that fateful day when someone questioned that and said, "Why should I go around the mountain when I can just climb it?" That day, the precursor to modern-day sport of rock climbing was born. For centuries, rock climbing has been just a way of getting to a tall vantage point or overcoming a barrier or even a spiritual practice by a tribe in the Alps. But in the last century, the practice has been getting increasingly popular. Today, I would like to enlighten you on the evolution and modernization of rock climbing. Rock climbing started picking up momentum around the turn of the 19th century, and today has exploded into a worldwide sport with multiple categories of climbing, with two being the dominant. Rock climbing can be used either with or without ropes, called top roping or bouldering. Top roping is where you climb with a harness and you're attached to a rope that's already pre-hung from the ceiling. This is the local rock climbing gym that I climb at and was like sponsored by. Another form of top roping is called lead climbing, where the rope isn't attached to the ceiling, and you clip yourself in to what are called carabiners, which are just little clips hanging off the side of the rock face. You have the rope attached to your harness. You just clip in as you climb up the rock face. Crack climbing is another form where you also use carabiners attached to it that are called cams, which are basically, they're little hooks that you pinch, place inside the crack, and then let go, and it expands, pushing against the sides of the rock face, and you clip in just like top roping or lead climbing and keep climbing. Bouldering is the opposite of top roping. You don't climb with any ropes or a harness whatsoever, and the only safety equipment you have occasionally is what's called a crash pad, which is a big foam, basically mattress, that you place under you as you climb. And you don't typically climb as high. Like you can see in the background, a person standing there, so you can tell it's not as high. So if you fall, there's a far less danger of getting hurt. This is actually the more popular form nowadays because a lot of people don't want to spend the money to go buy 1,000 feet of rope to climb the mountain face. And spotters and like co-climbers are really hard to find if you want to just drive up to Yosemite some afternoon and climb for the weekend. It's going to probably cost you anywhere from $500 to $1,000 for equipment and like climbing fees and etc. So bouldering is a lot more practical, and you can do it anywhere. Bouldering's expanded into what's called buildering, which is you go find the side of a building and you climb it, and into parkour. Dynoing is another form, which is really fun, where basically it's bouldering, but instead of climbing, you just jump from one rock to the other. So if you can see on the orange hold, the starting hold is right here. The next hold is right there. So it's kind of a far reach. So you have to jump to it. Typically, the handholds in bouldering are a lot stronger, they're a lot farther apart, and they're a lot bigger, so you can't slip off. And as you can see down here, there's still a bunch of padding in case you do fall. So, the early precursor of just trying to find a vantage point or getting around, getting like pioneers from one side of the country to the other, rock climbing's evolved into a worldwide popular sport. That's, I think, soon to be in the X Games or Olympics. I think one year they had it in the Summer X Games. So look out for it because it's getting a lot more popular.
Miranda, what did you think? She's not here?
Could I do it? For my own.
Yeah, who are you supposed to evaluate
I
for?
don't know, she's not here.
Tracy, maybe? Go ahead.
I think you did a pretty good job explaining like the different types of rock climbing. I never really knew there was kind of like bouldering or the difference between top climbing. I think you did a pretty good job explaining each of your visuals. You had a pretty good thesis. I think you could have been a little bit more approaching to the audience on your like I guess introduction. You were kind of just reading, but overall it's pretty solid. Seems like you know a lot about the sport and a lot of personal, I think, experiences you have.
Yeah, I've been sponsored doing it since I was second grade, so yeah.
Pretty good.
You don't need to stand there. That makes you look like a target. You know? We don't want you to feel like a target. Well, I like the opening description that you have as your attention device, and the subject, I think, is something that people will be interested in. You had an excellent thesis statement. There was not as much follow-up, though, on the preview. That I couldn't really tell what the structure of the speech was going to be, and it basically turns out that it's a list of the different types or techniques of climbing that you're going to be defining for us. So that actually sounds different than what the thesis statement was that you came up with. And I'm a little bit disoriented as to what it was I was supposed to get out of the speech. Now, looking back at it, I know what I got out of the speech, and that was that you did a nice job distinguishing the different techniques that are being used in rock climbing. And to me, I was a little confused because it sure sounds like, for the most part, you're talking about doing this in a contained, controlled internal environment. And most of the visuals that you had suggested that, especially when you talked about the techniques like bouldering, for instance, where the only safety issue that you've got is a pad on the ground. And I'm thinking, okay, well, if I'm going up to Yosemite for the weekend, I know there's not a pad on the ground. So this has got to be something that's practiced primarily. Is there a difference between the practice environment and doing it in the natural environment? Is it the same activity, or are they different activities? Which one is the one that's going to be in the Olympics or in the X Games, and which one is it that is, it's not, doesn't fit in that category? I think there's some ambiguity about those kinds of things. The techniques, I think you explain them pretty clearly. It's just, I think the context needs to be a little bit clearer, because as I'm watching all of it, it just appears to me that what you're talking about is doing this, I don't know what they call them, like in a gym, with a rock wall, pretty much that's what you've got. And if those are the only environments that you're talking about, okay, then it all makes sense. But put it in that context and tell us that, I want to talk about rock climbing that's done in this particular environment. Tell us what the environment is, and that's what you're going to be focusing on, as opposed to the rock climbing that people might do, like you said, climbing over the mountain to get from point A to point B, or to see the highest vantage point in the area to look at something. I know that some of the techniques would be the same. I just don't know that they would always be used in the other context. What's the one where dynoing, where you're jumping from one hand hold to another, that sort of thing? The way you described it, it sounds like, well, there's a series of planned holds that people are looking at, and they're spaced out in different kinds of ways, and say, okay, that sounds like it's a course in a planned environment that you're doing that. When you're climbing a mountain, I don't know that any of that kind of works, and maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, I don't know. Because, like I said, the context, I think, was a little bit vague on that. There are a lot of those terms, too. You've got, 6 or 7 of them that you've got a visual on and a description to go with. And I think that's why it felt a little problematic at the beginning, is because there